Hello everyone, the Green Scorpion here, and it's time to open those spellbooks and get your wands ready because this is sure to be one of my most controversial lists yet. You guys have been clamoring on about a top 10 Spellcasters list, and candidly, I've had some inhibitions about this one. Magic is a huge part of video games, and there are thousands of great characters that I could choose from, especially from RPGs. Magic has been a concept to us since the dawn of humanity, a term used for any phenomenon that we cannot explain, and in any fantasy media, writers are constantly finding new and exciting ways to display magic. So today, we're here to look at those wizards and witches who throw magical effects into their chief form of combat. In a classical sense, spellcasters tend to be physically feeble, depending not on their strength but their wits to fend off their aggressors. A major quality we'll be looking for is intelligence and knowledge of the craft. This is still Weapons Month after all. Just as a warrior improves with their physical weapon through fierce practice, many casters improve through diligent study of the arcane arts or the divine scriptures, leading to endless possibilities. Now, this topic is already far too vast, so I'm laying some qualifiers right off the bat. 1. No gods. Otherwise this list will be full of them and that just won't be fun. 2. Magical ability can come from natural talent or devoted training, but I want to try and draw the fine line between spells and superpowers. We aren't looking for mutants here. And in general, if there is a scientific explanation for it, it's not really magic to me. 3. Healers don't get a free pass. We're looking for offense here during Weapons Month. So if you're a white mage, good for you, but you also need to be able to fight. 4. A spellcaster can use a weapon, but their chief weapon should be the spells themselves. I like the idea that when fighting toe-to-toe with a soldier or a fellow caster, the mage will choose their spells first. Weapons endowed with magic don't count unless it's the caster themselves who enchanted it, or somehow earned it. 5. Psychic powers aren't magic. That's its own thing. And 6. If your magic turns out to be smoke and mirrors, that makes you a good magician, but not really a spellcaster. I know that's a lot, and even so, people are still going to be calling me out on my choices. So please try to respect my opinion. And if you can't, well, I cast Flame Shield. And with that said, I am the Green Scorpion, and I summon forth the top 10 greatest video game spellcasters. No fooling around this week. At number 10 we have Sypha Belnades from the Castlevania series. She grew up in a community of witches in the mid-1400s, but after her people were slain, the young Sypha swore revenge on Count Dracula and was trained as a hunter in the Eastern Orthodox Church. Her arcane heritage and her divine training made her an interesting caster with mastery over fire, ice, and lightning. These three powers are very common forms of magic in video games, here referred to as the Elemental Trinity. Fun fact, in Sypha's backstory, she travels in disguise as a man, knowing that the church would never let a woman join the hunting parties. But this was mistranslated in the English version, and in the English instruction manual to Castlevania 3, it originally stated that Sypha was a man. This led to a lot of confusion among players, the apex of which was Sypha's appearance in the Captain N cartoon as an old geezer. After Trevor frees her from a statue, Sypha joins the cause to stop the vampire, bringing along her incredibly useful sorcery. It's harder to appreciate the extent of her magic in 8 bits, so luckily we have Castlevania Judgment. She doesn't always have time to recite a full spell, so she also taught herself to clock someone with her staff. Not to mention, she can unlock her Book of Forbidden Witchcraft to unleash the elements in their purest, most destructive forms. An adept witch, and the mother of the Belmont clan, Sypha is the sorceress you want with you to kill a vampire.
You must learn the difference between the wicked and the righteous.
Okay guys, you probably already know by now that I love Fire Emblem. This is the 5th time I've used it for Weapons Month, and one of my toughest picks yet. How am I supposed to pick just one mage from the entire Fire Emblem catalog? The challenge is that, while some characters have different stats that might make them preferable, everything playthrough is different, and every player will attach themselves to different characters. I played Sacred Stones, and I trained Artur to be an unstoppable bishop, but maybe you preferred Lute's Penchant for anima spells. Maybe in Blazing Sword you start using Erk right away and max him by the end of the game. Or maybe when Athos joins the party you are blown away by his great starting power. Soren, Bastion, Micaiah, they're all good choices. So for my choice, I finally had to pick my favorite Fire Emblem game and look at who my main caster was. From Fire Emblem Awakening, this is Tharja. Practically the opposite of Sypha, Tharja is a creepy, sadistic dark mage, as scary in person as she is on the battlefield. She fights for Chrom mainly as an excuse to kill or experiment on more people, and she has a really unsettling interest in the Avatar character Robin. So basically, her job is gruesome killing and her hobby is stalking you. She also has an interest in hexes and curses. Through different support conversations, you'll discover that she has magical concoctions that cure the common cold, make people ill, turn them into mindless slaves, help her tell the future, and if she can get it just right, make people fall in love with her. Despite her macabre activities, her reliability in combat makes her a good psychotic to have around. Tharja is a dark mage, which is like a regular mage, only she uses different spells and has a tendency to be a little slower and tankier. The idea of a mage is that they can attack from one space away, like the archers, to get free hits on enemy units. Unlike the archers though, they can also attack up front so they can counterattack if they get approached by a fighter or cavalier. The downside is that mages can't take a lot of hits, but there are ways of making up for this. She uses spells by equipping dark tomes, including Nosferatu, which lets her steal people's souls while healing herself. Her passive abilities are Hex and Anathema, which make it harder for her adversaries to dodge her attacks. And without getting into reclassing, Tharja can be upgraded into either a Dark Knight or a Sorceress. And while Dark Knights gain elemental spells and the ability to cast while on horseback, I prefer Tharja as a Sorceress. As such, she learns Vengeance, which can add damage to her spells equal to half the amount of the damage she's taken. Combine Vengeance with a fully stocked Nosferatu spell, and Tharja's ready for the front lines. Better she vent all that sadistic witchcraft on the enemy. Imagine that Tails was a humanoid kid with white hair, still a genius, but instead of building planes, he studied the mystic arts. That's Genis Sage in a nutshell. Lloyd Irving is the hero of Tales and Symphonia, but his best friend Genis has his back through the entire game. Raised by his sister in a small village, Genis took to his studies, outshining everyone in his class despite being significantly younger than the others. Not only is he a whiz at history, math, science, and cooking, he is also one of the world's best magic users. So when he and Lloyd get banished from their hometown, Colette and the gang are quick to invite him on their expedition. Life lesson, kids, always befriend the mage. Granted, Genis' skills aren't entirely based on natural talent. He and his sister are half-elves, so magic just runs in his blood. And his powers are even more enhanced by the X-Sphere he got from his friend Marble. But Genis also possesses an unmatched intellect, and throughout the game he just gets more and more powerful. He casts his spells through a kendama, a weird toy that seemingly only he can use in battle. His physical attacks are next to useless, but by bouncing that little rubber ball around, he can cast spells that get more and more awe-inspiring the higher level he gets. Sypha's got the elemental trinity, but Genis commands spells in 7 elements: fire, lightning, ice, water, wind, earth, and even a light spell. The only style in the game that he doesn't cover is darkness, cause really, he's just too sweet. He's a little bit of a twerp, but as long as there's someone to keep the monsters away from him, he'll be sure to end the fight with giant stalagmites, volcanic eruptions, otherworldly thunderstorms, and screen-clearing tsunamis. By reconciling with the elves, he can learn his ultimate spell, Meteor Storm, which makes most other attacks in the game seem pointless. If there is one thing that really does hurt Genis though in his ranking, it's his dependence on his allies. His spells require him to monologue for several seconds, leaving himself wide open to attacks which, when they hit, interrupt the flow of the spell. There are ways to upgrade him to minimize this problem, but he really isn't designed for one-on-one confrontations. That said, if he's with his teammates, he pulls his weight tenfold, so it's not really a deal breaker. But as you'll see, the other adepts on this list do just fine on their own. This was another tough one. How do I pick the best magic user in League of Legends? I started by picking out all of the AP casters, then from a flavor standpoint, I removed the champions whose magic damage was actually coming from technology or something external. That barely made a dent, so I was going to default to my personal favorite, Ahri. But just to be super thorough, I perused the lore pages again and came up with my choice. Ryze the Rogue Mage. Magic is pretty common in Runeterra, coming from a number of sources, and those interested in learning its ways can do so at a university, studying fundamental charms, or even techmaturgy. But Ryze wasn't one for traditional schooling, so instead he traveled the lands meeting hermits, warlocks, hidden villages, basically anyone who could teach him what the schools couldn't, and he collected a lifetime of obscure incantations in his books and scrolls. Eventually he came across thorn magic, a lost practice in which a mage tattoos runes onto their own skin. This not only made Ryze a mightier wizard, it transformed his body into an entity of magic itself. Not aligned with any particular city-state, he works at the Institute of War as the world's foremost authority on spellcraft, helping countless people, including fellow champions, with their esoteric magical problems. Oh, and he also carries a giant, indestructible scroll on his back that, if anyone ever read it, it could destroy all life in the world in devastating Armageddon. Yes, I know, Nocturne sliced through it in the promo, but if you look closely, it seems to have repaired itself a few frames later. If this thing fell into the wrong hands, Runeterra would be reduced to ash. The sad irony of Ryze is that, despite being a master of the unknown arts, he only uses 4 spells. And truth be told, I don't really like playing Ryze as much as I actually like Ryze himself, but let's go over his kit anyway. Ryze has narrowed his spellbook down to specialize in lightning and snares. Ryze's main damage comes from his nuke spell, Overload. He's also got Rune Prison to root enemies in place, and Spell Flux, which does less damage but bounces around to hit multiple targets, lowering their magic resist. Great spells, but there are 3 great qualities that, though I still don't play him, make him great. Overload scales off of ability power, but also off of Ryze's maximum mana, making for some unique movesets for Ryze. Ryze's ultimate, Desperate Power, gives Ryze a supercharge for up to 7 seconds, giving his other spells the effect of Spell Vamp. With all of that spell vamp, Ryze actually becomes remarkably tanky for a mage. My favorite is Ryze's passive, Arcane Mastery. With this, every time Ryze casts a spell, his other spells lower their cooldown by 1 second. This arsenal of magical qualities encourages machine gun casting to do maximum damage and keep yourself healed up. Just stroll over to your enemies, make sure Smartcast is on, and pound your fingers on that keyboard like Schroeder at the Christmas pageant. John, what kind of script writing is this? Okay, hear me out on this one. Ganondorf. It seemed weird to me at first too. I was totally prepared to put Vati or Princess Zelda herself on this list. But Ganondorf is quite the formidable warlock. And who is the one ultimately ordering Vati around? Ganondorf. Who consistently defeats Zelda unless Link is there to do the grunt work? Ganondorf. He's not the big bad of Hyrule for nothing after all, so let's take a look. Now, we know that Demise's spirit is responsible for the evil that will always oppose the Hylian royal family. But the sad thing is that Ganondorf started out as just a man. A rather decent one at that. And is it just me, or could Ganondorf totally be a descendant of Groose? Seriously, Groose and his buds flying off to parts unknown at the end of Skyward Sword? The Gerudo totally could be an etymological bastardization of his name, since Groose loved naming things after himself. They have yellow eyes and red hair, and if Ganondorf becomes the holder of the Triforce of Power, well, who were the 3 heroes that were against Girahim at the end of Skyward Sword? Link, Zelda, and Groose. Just give Ganon a pompadour and... Well, I've completely lost the topic. Where is it? Oh, here it is. In his quest to get his people out of the desert, Ganondorf became obsessed with the power of the gods, eventually stealing the aforementioned Golden Triangle. He was raised by his surrogate mothers, the witches Kum and Kotake, so he was probably raised with some magical know-how that was only enhanced with the Triforce. Let's just list some of the things that we know Ganondorf can do. Shooting a wave of dark energy that wards away Navi, throwing balls of electricity, deflecting said electricity by backhanding it, sending shockwaves through the ground, floating, channeling his inner hatred to become a giant pig monster called Ganon, materializing swords from the ether, turning his shadow into a self-sufficient magical assassin, putting his Ganonness into a giant marionette and controlling it to shapeshift, turning Zelda into a puppet, making unbreakable walls of twilight energy, taking a sword through the chest and just walking it off, using the power trident to rain down lightning, becoming invisible and incorporeal in darkness, spontaneously putting out nearby fire so that he can stay invisible and incorporeal, teleporting, summoning fire keys at will, creating moblins of darkness in his own image, bending countless giant monsters to his will, catching Zelda in the moment she reveals herself, encasing her in crystal, and teleporting her to him from a mile away. It's really a lot of sorcery when you lay it all down like that, but we still tend to forget it because in addition to all of that, Ganondorf remains an expert sword master and an unarmed fighter of unparalleled brawn. but he probably wouldn't have that strength or his army of darkness if he hadn't first become a fearsome warlock. Have I ever mentioned before that I love Cave Story? Even if it is hard as hell, it also has a great cast of characters and knows just how much exposition to give without losing sight of its primary function as a shoot-'em-up. We actually have two big powerful mages here, Mizuhi the Witch and the Mad King Balos. Balos is the big bad and is easily the more powerful one, but his boss battle is less, "Behold my mastery of magic," and more, "Let me show you my true form." So the number 5 spot goes to his niece Mizuhi, since she's consistently seen throughout the game as a master of the hexes. In the game's lore, a witch named Jenka trapped Balos away in the floating island so that he couldn't wreak any more havoc, but Jenka's daughter Mizuhi had her own maniacal plans. She forced Balos to forge the Demon Crown, an all-powerful hat that bestowed dominion of the island to anyone who wore it. But Balos got the last laugh there by cursing Mizuhi so that she'd have to serve whoever wore the crown. Family dinners must have been really awkward for these two. What makes Mizuhi such a compelling villain, in part, is how untouchable she seems at first. Most of the time she has her cohort Balrog do the dirty work, but when she has to act, most of the time you don't even get a chance to respond. Her ability to teleport is seemingly boundless. Not only can she teleport to you, she is seen trapping Toroko in a bubble and fourth-dimensionally abducts her. And at another point, she banishes Quote, the game's hero, to the Labyrinth, a near-inescapable prison of her own architecture. There's this real feeling of hopelessness when you're left to rust at the bottom of this dank hole. If you can't beat Mizuhi, how can you hope to defeat the Doctor who is terrorizing the Migas? But with some fancy footwork, you're on your way again, and eventually Mizuhi concludes that just sending you away won't finish the job, and commits to ending you herself. Learning the pattern to fighting Mizuhi is pretty tough, and it only gets tougher the more damage she sustained. She flies and warps around, shooting lightning, protecting herself with shadowy satellites, teleporting in fire bats, and her most fiendish trick yet, dropping a rock on you. It sounds funny, but when I die to Mizuhi, it's usually death by rock. Mizuhi also fights alongside the Doctor in the not-so-final boss battle, controlled by the Demon Crown and morphed into a weird abomination. Her summoning powers get even more ridiculous, as she calls in bats, power critters, and homing fish missiles. That's pretty crazy stuff, but on occasion Mizuhi still enjoys the classics like turning Balrog into a frog. Mizuhi may not be the strongest of Quote's adversaries, but her omnipresence in the story and her great use of multiple spells at once make her the best spellcaster on that little floating island. There hasn't been a lot of quote-unquote traditional wizards on this list. You know, pointy hat, long with beards, your Merlins and your Gandalfs. I guess I'm just more attracted to the offbeat mages, and this next character is about as offbeat as it gets. From Baten Kaitos, we have Mizuhi. Now, don't get me wrong, this game is already pretty weird, but when this little tiki thing shows up, guiding you through the dimensional rift, just what even is it? Well, I'd like to show you, but footage for this game is pretty scarce, so I'm trying my best to compile some good visual aids for you here. Despite the sheer confusion that Mizuhi makes me feel, I couldn't help but immediately grow a liking to it. Actually, Mizuhi is a she, and is actually a human from Gemma, one of the last civilizations on Earth below the clouds and floating islands. She wears a mask because it's traditional for her tribe, and it protects her lungs from the planet's poisonous fog, but you won't know this until at least 30 hours after you meet her. But despite her expressionless face and distorted voice, Mizuhi is actually kind of hilarious, and maybe it's because of the distorted voice. She refers to herself as the Great Mizuhi all the time, and can be very full of herself, justifiable because of what good of a mage she is. When you get to the Gemma village and meet her mask-wearing brethren, you expect them to be just as goofy and eccentric as her, but they're not. Even among her bottom-dwelling spell-warped people, Mizuhi is absolutely abnormal. She is the only one truly in tune with her magic heritage. She's so magically inclined that she just kind of floats. All the time. She floats in the air, she floats on her chakra, and she moves as she walks on air. For no apparent reason other than being weird. And I love it! Along with Shella, Mizuhi can use the spell Magnuses, which cover the elements of fire, water, light, darkness, wind, and Chronos. Yeah, Chronos. Why time is a main element and why it's considered to be the opposite of wind is utterly beyond my comprehension, much like this game. But Mizuhi's finishing moves are what really get just confusing. The lowest level of these are physical element magic, the only cards of that type in the game. They include breathing magical flux and freaking eating people. The first time I saw this, I think I had a traumatic breakdown. And that's only her level 3. She opens dimensional barriers to drop totem poles on people, she attacks with her shadow, she summons her own giant visage, and it's not enough for her to take a big water or fire finisher, no! She makes them into these giant water serpents and giant fire lions. Even the descriptions of these spells in the menus have Mizuhi's weirdness written all over them. I don't even. Well, Mizuhi isn't just powerful, she's creative and just unlike anything I've ever seen before. I can only hope she's one of a kind. I talked about how good Mizuhi is at teleporting magic, but Dimentio from Super Paper Mario just takes that to a whole new level. As his name suggests, he is a master of dimensions, and since that's the central theme of the game, that makes Dimentio a pretty important guy. At first, he works for Count Bleck, the supposed main villain, but as the golden rule states, never trust the clown. He spends the entire game plotting, standing back, or rather, floating back, and letting Mario collect the pure hearts as part of his big chess-like strategy for multiverse domination. As far as spells go, he doesn't showcase as many different abilities as Mizuhi or Mizuhi, but it's quality over quantity here. Dimentio is really savvy to the situation, only fighting when he has to, and I think most of the time he's actually holding back, since he ultimately needs you for his plan to work. Like Mario, Dimentio can shift dimensions, exploding the game's 2D world by moving to the third dimension. But Dimentio's powers also extend to alternate dimensions, i.e. other worlds. Considering that you have to use these special gates opened by the Pure Hearts to visit other universes, it's pretty scary that Dimentio can just warp to other planes on a whim. He can also banish people in a similar fashion to Mizuhi, but instead of just throwing them into a dark, danky, smelly cave, he throws them into the Paper Mario equivalent of hell, or to the D-Dimension, a demi-plane of his own creation where he makes the rules, bending physics, logic, and more importantly, stats to his liking. His signature attack looks like he's cropping someone on MS Paint. He can do this to trap someone in a box, then produce cataclysmic explosions to incinerate his victims into fine powder. Or just knock their HP to 0, that works too. Dimentio also has a sense of humor about his magic. He is something I really appreciate in a caster. Did you happen to find that room in Bleck's castle filled with hundreds of Dimentio clones? They don't even hurt you. He just keeps body doubles in storage for some reason. He's an evil, humorous jester, and that's just the way I like it. Can Kingdom Hearts 3 come out already? I want to kill Xehanort! This man is behind everything, I repeat, everything that has gone wrong in the Kingdom Hearts series. His obsession to open Kingdom Hearts and reconstruct all worlds has been the ongoing line in the background for 7 games, and no matter how many times he gets killed, he just won't die. Let's take a look at this. He was already old as dirt in Birth by Sleep, and just when he's defeated by Terra, he uses his powers to transfer all of his essence and knowledge into Terra, essentially possessing him. Terra managed to fight him off long enough to lock away his memories, but this was just a slight delay for Xehanort's ridiculous gambit. As Terranort, he then became an assistant to Ansem the Wise, stole his name, and completed an experiment to create Organization 13, his soul becoming the Heartless, Ansem, and his body becoming the Nobody, Xemnas. Sora killed both of these effective hexers only for Ansem to live in Riku's heart, and Xemnas to come back because who the hell even knows. And because both halves were destroyed, it made a way for the Master to truly resurrect himself. How did he do it? By time traveling. Xehanort had so much foresight, so many backup plans, that as a child he time-skipped into Dream Drop Distance, set everything from Maleficent's conquest to Sora's own journey in motion, and made it possible for his future self to return as the leader of a second Organization 13, made up of all the members that are, in at least some way, partly Xehanort, including Ansem and Xemnas again. Just what the hell, man? Why won't you die? His Voldemort-like immortality might make him impressive enough, but he's also a genius when it comes to magical combat. He is a Keyblade master, so I might have disqualified him for having a primary weapon, but unlike Sora and the other holders, Xehanort uses his Keyblade mainly as a conduit for his sorcery, only occasionally actually swinging it, and even then, he's pretty nonchalant about it. He leaves the acrobatics and melee fighting to his apprentice Vanitas, who, by the way, he also created by warping the magic of the human soul. I think his big fight against Terra, Aqua, and Ventus best puts his power into perspective. He uses most of his spells without even holding the Keyblade, freezes Ventus solid and practically shatters him, has enhanced strength that I can only assume is supernatural, and he uses the rare earth magic to terraform the landscape to his will, effortlessly forming mountains to get to high ground. He can also just levitate hundreds of Keyblades to chase down his foes. I think this guy also deserves the credit for what his demon spawns do, because they are entirely composed of him. Ansem uses all sorts of shadowy projects, usually seen fighting with his big Heartless monster coming out of his back. He also commands the Heartless with an iron fist, and can continue to torment Riku even after he is dead, eventually overpowering the lad so that he looks just like Ansem. Xemnas is even more powerful. While the other nobodies have mastery over fire, water, death, or time, Xemnas bends reality itself in a way that even Dimentio couldn't dream of. He also shoots lasers from all angles, or freezes them in his hands to use his lightsabers, and in Dream Drop Distance he regularly throws 40-story buildings at Sora by waving his hands. And all three of these villains, of course, have mastered the art of teleporting all over the freaking place. Square Enix, you said that Kingdom Hearts 3 would be the end of the Xehanort saga. Please let that mean we can finally dig this guy a grave. Let me repeat myself. Never trust the clown. There were a lot of characters from Final Fantasy that I could have used here. Tella, Terra, Hope, Lulu. In fact, I really wanted to do an entry on Vivi, but then Vivi never destroyed the world, did he? I'm not just default because he's so popular either. Kefka puts all of the other measly wizards to shame. I don't need to explain why Kefka's such a good villain again, because I've already done that before. And if you're looking for another analysis on the religious imagery in this boss fight, I can point you to a few other Countdown artists who have done it better. Let's just look at him as a spellcaster. As the story goes, he was Emperor Gestal's first guinea pig for creating Magitech Knights by augmenting individuals with the raw elements of Magicite, which are actually dormant magical creatures called espers. You could argue that this is why Kefka is so unhinged, as a side effect of the Magicite, but either way, it should be noted that Kefka was not born a powerful magus. He was actually made one. In fact, the first few times you fight him, his spells are actually pretty puny in the grand scheme of things. At this point, Kefka gets by not by force, but by conniving, endearing himself to the king, playing the role of the witless peon, poisoning Doma's water supply, and surrounding himself with much stronger Magitech Knights. As the game progresses, he collects more Magicite, and you'll notice him steadily becoming more powerful. By the time you get to Thamasa, he is strong enough to withstand the attacks of a dozen espers with nary a scratch and convert them into Magicite in the blink of an eye. Then he heads to the Flying Continent. At this point he is able to create impenetrable force fields and cast freaking Ultima, so it stands to reason that by this point he can access all of the spells available to the player, including Thundaga, Blizzaga, Firaga, Graviga, Meteor, Holy, and Flare. He then proceeds to push the statues of the Triad out of alignment, destroying most life on the planet and becoming the new god of magic. But wait, didn't I say no gods in my rules at the beginning? Well, I think there's an important detail to glean from this. Kefka may end up a god of sorcery, raining his judgment over the world from on high whenever he feels like it, but remember that at one point he was just a man. He got this chance to gain a little bit of magical potential in his veins, and from there he scraped and clawed his way to divine power, able to take any form and reducing cities and civilizations to ash as shrines to his own nihilism. Wow, this is a really awfully evil list, isn't it? Ganondorf, Xehanort, Mizuhi, Dimentio, heck, Tharja fights for the good guys, but she is pretty darn insidious, and Ryze and Mizuhi get pretty dark when you really delve into them. I guess the sad truth is that those who approach magic with no inhibitions or moral restraint tend to achieve more power. Good ultimately prevails over Kefka, but it takes a dozen heroes, or 4 that have been thoroughly level grinded, to overcome this one Dark Lord and his frenzied casting. I guess that's not a very happy ending to this list, but as long as there is good in the world, or gamers who want to finish the game, those evil warlocks have their days numbered. I am the Green Scorpion, and if it weren't for these all-powerful mages, we wouldn't get the chance to defeat the undefeated. So I guess, thank you Kefka, for destroying the world. It just means that we got to save it. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.
I threw a rock at him!